All right, here we are. We're back. Boys are back in town. David Fincher deep dive. We're doing Zodiac tonight. So this is the next movie. We're watching them in chronological order. Tonight we've got Chase, Alan, and Justin joining me for this conversation about Zodiac. Well, really a conversation about David Fincher using Zodiac as a scaffolding to massage the conversation. So let me just start off. I think it's, I don't know, I like, maybe we can deviate from this later on if you guys have any pushback, but I actually like just starting off the conversation by briefly explaining, like, what is your relationship with the movie? Like the first time you saw it, was this the first time you saw it? First impressions, progressive. Chase, you got some sort of speaker? Am I echoing on Chase's?
Maybe. Let me mute.
Yeah, I can hear myself talk. Anyway, I think this is a good way to start the conversation. Just like, what is your relationship with the movie? And it doesn't even have to be like, what was it like the first time you saw it or whatever. Because for me, and I'll kind of kick this off if you guys want to think about it. The first time I saw this was in Sean McMullen's Benz, his Mercedes Benz. We were on a road trip, and it was so cool. It was a DVD player in his car where it's just like, you push the buttons, like, and a screen popped up. And so we watched Zodiac. I think we were driving from Arizona to Utah or something like that. And I fell asleep like in the middle of the movie. And then I woke up kind of sporadically towards the end. I fell asleep again. So I kind of had a general idea of what Zodiac was about. And then I watched it all the way through probably 5 years ago. And that was like the first real watching where I was like really paying attention. It's like, hey, that's a decent movie. And then of course this time watching it with through the lens of critiquing David Fincher, especially in the context of the previous movies that we watched, I found even more enjoyment out of it. I kind of unfortunately gave Justin some expectation spoilers on our last call in preparation for this one. We're like, we're doing Zodiac next time. And Drew was like, hey, I want you guys to think about, like, if there's 12 movies in David Fincher's repertoire, what 6 would you keep and what 6 would you kill? Like when we're done with this like exercise, like I think that's a good question to ask. Like, and I kind of gave Justin some expectation spoilers. I'm like, I think I'm gonna kill Zodiac. Based on what I've seen so far, my least favorite movies have been Alien 3 of David Fincher, Alien 3, and Zodiac. That doesn't mean Zodiac's bad, and we will dissect and digest, because I actually think it's a really good movie. It's problematic in that it's based on a true story. So David Fincher doesn't have a lot of creative liberties, even though the story was just absolutely amazing. Like, it's one of those things where in real life, I bet, citizens of San Francisco are like, you can't make this up. Like, it really was perfect for a movie. But the ending, I mean, my wife was like, and I'm kind of the same way. She's like, well, that wasn't satisfying. I'm like, well, I was going to say welcome to David Fincher, but the problem is he actually is known for like a twist at the end, or like an aha at the, I mean, think about all the movies, right? The Game was like, it did that. Fight Club, obviously. You've got, I guess not so much Panic Room, but Seven, you got the box scene with Brad Pitt. And so it always seems to be like David Fincher really likes movies that have like a cool little twist at the end to make you go, ah, even if it's like a bad like in Seven. This one didn't really have that. And I think his hands were tied just because it was a true story. And I feel like it kind of took away from some of the specialness that is David Fincher. And I am more than happy to be to receive pushback on this. That was just kind of my initial thoughts going into this as I'm describing my relationship with the movie. Chase, let's go with you next.
Yeah, so I want to say I saw it in theaters. This was 2007. So if I saw it in theaters, probably with Sterling. This was in Stacy's no R-rated movie phase. And like, yeah, I think I saw it mainly because it was, so one, it was something that Sterling was interested in. And then, Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. were in it, and so kind of was pulled towards that. And then I saw it. I rewatched it again in the 2010s. I think I'd moved to Utah by that time, so we're talking like 2016, 2017, and then I think I rewatched it again in the last couple of months. Kind of in a little bit in preparation for this as we started talking about doing a David Fincher deep dive. I think I agree a lot with your assessment. I think the struggle is that it is a true story, or it's based on a true story. However, I would say, and we've seen it in different things since Zodiac, where you have like these true crime podcasts and all this stuff that like Stacy listens to, where they're like personal, like investigative people who do enough digging to like uncover additional factoids and clues that maybe the police missed or whatever, and they basically can reopen these cold cases and get momentum going. I know I had mentioned, I think it was, Bo, at least to you, and I think to Drew as well. There's a documentary that came out, I think it was like right at the beginning of COVID, called Don't F with Cats. And it's about like these home journalists or like internet sleuths who there was a guy who was killing cats. And so they figured out where this guy lived and turned him into the police. And it was kind of a big deal and everything. And it was always like these weird little clues that he left, or that they were able to pull out. And so watching Zodiac, kind of my hope is that like David Fincher might have uncovered something additional to bring, more light to that story. And maybe he figured out, or the people he had hired had figured out who the Zodiac killer was. And so like for me, the anticipation was, man, they might have figured this out and they're going to do this big reveal. But just like Natalie, I was left unsatisfied with the story. And unfortunately, a lot of times in life, you are left unsatisfied. You don't get resolution. And so maybe that's a better way to look at it. But from a cinematic perspective, it sometimes it sucks to have like, you basically end at the climax and it's like, hey, we don't know what happened. It's just over. And good luck going to sleep tonight knowing that this killer is probably still out there, right? And that's where you are. And anyways, so yeah, it was an interesting take. From my perspective, this is one of two movies that he's done that is based on real life, right? This and then The Social Network. So to that end, these stories are still evolving. You don't have a good final, hey, we caught the bad guy, they executed him, or he's in jail, or whatever, that you've seen with other, movies based on historical serial killers where they did catch him and whatever. I think he took a chance with, hey, I'm going to tell a story that isn't done, and we don't know if it's ever going to be done. So anyways, but yeah, that's kind of my background with the movie Zodiac.
One thing I will say, for anybody that doesn't like endings like this, don't ever watch The Little Things. It's a movie with Denzel Washington and Jared Leto. Has anybody seen that? Give me a nod or a shake. No? Little Things? Don't see it. It is a 2-hour mystery murder, and it leaves you like completely wanting at the end, even more than Zodiac. At least Zodiac, you got like the captions where it kind of wraps things up with like the real life story. The Little Things, in my opinion, and you know what, I read all the reviews on Little Things. I'm like, did anybody enjoy this movie? And they said a lot of the similar things that Chase just said, where it's like, that's real life. Like anybody who's a cop or a detective, most like mysteries go unsolved. Like and so that was their justification of enjoying The Little Things. They're like, that's actually more true to life than having like this big climactic, like buttoned up ending with a nice little ribbon tied on top, Alan, what are your thoughts?
So I'll second what you guys already said. not the most satisfying of films. But my first experience with this was actually just a couple of years ago, and on my last deployment, Becky had kind of gotten into, some of the some crime dramas, and like the Ted Bundy docuseries came out, and then the new movie and that kind of stuff. And so she was just kind of telling me about it when we're playing catch up after deployment, that kind of thing. And then we get settled into Georgia. But before I went on deployment, I went to a school, and part of that school, we actually cryptologic school, and we actually spent a full day like going through like the different types of ciphers, like transposition ciphers, polygraphic ciphers, which leads into the more complicated stuff, private key and public key cryptology and that kind of thing. So we but it was fun because like he kind of starts the class and he puts up some ciphers, and he's like, here's a basic one, let's decode it. And we kind of did it as a class, and it was actually really fun. Not something that I, do on a daily basis, but it was really fun to kind of get into it. And so then, fast forward to, talking about it with Becky, and I was like, they did a movie based on the Zodiac killer, which was, that's what it is. It's different types of ciphers. And that was what was one of the things that was really compelling about the real life version of the story. And so we watched it. So that's when I first watched this movie. I watched it with Becky, and and there it was. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, but that was my first exposure to it. My first viewing was pretty fun, kind of just wrapped up in the more true to life crime drama that that I actually think that Dave Fincher did an amazing job of capturing. I did take down a couple of notes, and then I stopped. But one of the things that I definitely wanted to articulate was he did a really good job of delivering the strain and stress that people during that time that lived during that time were like dealing with. And that's one thing that I thought that I felt like he delivered from the screen, into my own home and into my own reality. Just the uneasiness about, uncertainty and the confusion, and then just a little bit of terror, right? Like the Zodiac killer was, he was doing it for the fame. Like that's early basic domestic terrorism, So anyway, I'll pause there and let Justin have a word. But that's my first experience. I didn't know that it was David Fincher at the time. It was just we wanted to watch this movie. I knew they made it based on true life, real events. And then actually, I will say one more thing. What surprised me is that the people in the movie, for some reason, I thought the movie was way older, and it wasn't, right? So all the actors in the movie are actors that I'm familiar with, and they look like the actors the way that I know them because that wasn't that long ago. So even though it took place in the 60s, the scene, right? It was the 60s, right? It was funny for me watching it this again the second time. I was like, oh man, these guys don't look like young versions of themselves. They look like the versions of themselves that I remember. So that's just a funny observation this time.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into the dissecting of the performances, Robert Downey Jr., Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo. I'm excited to talk about that. But Justin, I'm even more excited to hear your experience. This whole experiment, the David Fincher deep dive has been extra fun because you are the one person in the group that seems to be a David Fincher virgin other than Alien 3. Your opinion and your like raw feedback as like a fully grown adult with a mature brain, and you're seeing this all these movies for the first time. Give us your take on Zodiac.
To start my deep dive, I'm like deep into Liquid Death right now. But now that I've quenched my thirst, I can really go deep into this introductory of seeing this movie for the first time.
Justin, you murdered your thirst, not quenched it. Murdered your thirst.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
I Zodiac this puppy. As far as this is, I've wanted to see this one because of the three main actors in this. So really excited, and I was like, oh, the best movie is gonna be Zodiac. And then you're like, hey, it's okay. And then I had some other people say it's okay, it's good. So this one to me was, I felt like all the other ones up until now, throw Alien 3, we just don't consider that a category of his movies, where he has a blank slate, a blank sheet of paper, and he goes, what's my movie going to be? And he crafts this narrative. This is the first time I felt like he was confined inside the box, in the pages of history. And he did his best to recreate that history. That's why I'm wearing my shades and my fake mustache, my molestache. As far as hitting the beats of the 70s, 69 to 70, it was very well thought out, but it was still, he had boxes all around him. And I felt like the narrative, he would jump 2 weeks, 8 months, 4 years. And you're like, where is this going? And then I realized this is a PTSD movie for the survivors. That's what it is. And I think to Chase's point, he recreated it so well, and we'll get into his details, but he recreated it so well, I think, to jar up in 2007, hey, let me give you the facts as much as I can so that maybe something, the cold case can be warm again. And so that's why I felt that this was more of a well-crafted documentary. And although he took liberties, but it felt like a well-orchestrated documentary and not really a movie. And there was scenes like, I'll just say the one scene, the cellar basement scene, where I was like, oh, okay, there's the Fincher classic. But other than that, and they had rain twice, but other than that, it was very, very inside the box.
Yeah, fair assessment. That basement scene was so cool and uncool. It was cool because it was the one part of the movie where my wife literally had to pull the covers over her head. She's like, tell me when it's over. And I love that, like that feeling of thrill and suspense and dread that David Fincher, we talked about this in previous episodes, where he's able to craft atmosphere and emotion. And that's what I want when I watch any movie, is make me feel something. David Fincher makes me feel again, Alien 3 aside, every single movie so far has made me feel deeply in some way. I actually wasn't, I'd seen the movie before, so I knew that nothing came of and that's why the scene kind of sucked, is because there was no payoff with the dread that everybody felt. But the fact that he could like make you feel that and then not do anything with it, I think is kind of a cool piece of artistry. So I wasn't feeling dread in that moment like my wife was, and it was fun for me because I'm like, oh, she doesn't know, nothing will happen. But I was like playing in, I'm like, yeah, you're not going to want to see this next scene. Yeah, like you might want to plug your ears too, like you can hear the squelching. And she's like, don't tell me that. And I'm playing it up, but knowing that nothing would come of it. What this movie made me feel was like, I don't know, what I'm trying to describe the emotion. It's like excitement and like intellectual challenge. That's what I loved, is the ciphers, the mysteries, the puzzle pieces, the letters he was sending in, the fingerprints, the handwriting. Like you're on this journey with Jake Gyllenhaal's character, trying desperately to just, there's so much evidence, but how do we not have a perpetrator? How do we not have somebody behind bars? There's so much, and he keeps taunting us and he's calling us and writing us letters. Like that thrill was what I really loved about the movie, despite the ending not having as much of a payoff as I would have hoped. That's what made me feel, is you know, the couple times at the beginning of the movie, like the first act of this movie is incredible, where not only are you seeing murders, but you're seeing Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's like, I like puzzles. Like he's that guy. And I don't know, that did it for me. Scratch the itch. Alan, what would you say your favorite part and your least favorite part about the movie was?
My favorite part of the movie is kind of like what you're talking about, and it's when RDJ gets the Halloween card from the Zodiac killer, and he opens it up and it's got the piece of cloth in it still, right? Or another piece of cloth with blood on it, and he just like freaks out and he like flips out and he like throws it down. He's like starts yelling out because I love that moment so much, because that's when like the full gravity of like of the torment that you just described kind of like sunk in on him. And then from there on, the real life person like just deteriorated, like what Justin was saying. Like it was PTSD. Like it tormented him for the rest of his life. And you know, if I remember correctly, sorry, I might be getting this wrong. Didn't he die like from alcohol poisoning? Maybe I kind of forget his outcome. But anyway, wait, am I right?
Are you talking about Robert Downey Jr.'s
Yeah.
character? Yeah. You're right on that. Yep.
Yeah. So he basically like drunk himself to death over the torment that he experienced from his time working the Zodiac case. One of the things that I also I realized it as I was watching this, and then so I ended up looking it up, but I realized that, or rather I noticed that the Zodiac, or so the murders that happen in this movie, there was always a survivor. And I knew that, and they had mentioned the other murders that happened where there weren't any survivors. And I thought it was kind of strange from a director's perspective. And what I found out was that David Fincher and the writer spent like 18 months researching this case before they actually even like started production, because they wanted to get it so right. And it was a choice that he took. He's like, I'm not going to do a single murder unless I can speak to the survivors to get it 100% right. And then then reading through that, I also found out that the none of the blood that you saw was practical effects. It was all digital that he put in, because he did the shots so many times because he wanted it to be perfect the way that it actually happened, based off of like news reports and police reports and the survivors' stories, and making it like all exactly the way that it was. And so even if it was a little bit off, he just said, he's like, I can't do practical effects because I can't reset every time. We're just gonna we'll put in the blood splatters in post with digital effects. So what I love about that little piece of trivia is that Justin says that he was confined to a box, but I think he put himself in this box this time. I think he was challenging himself to bring to film a real life event that's a step further than a documentary. It's not boring like boring. I've seen some good documentaries, but not as educational as a documentary, and also thrilling in the sense that you're experiencing what these people lived through with them. And so putting himself into that box, I think, was actually kind of genius, because he worked so hard to make it right. And it was a story that pretty much told itself. And then just the nuances, there were the David Fincher elements to it, but I'll conclude with this is, I think that so far this is the least David Fincher of the films that we've seen. Like there's a lot in it that's like upbeat and feels like I'm living in the 60s, right? Like, you know, the way that often Hollywood portrays the 60s, you know, Heartland America. I mean, even though it was California, but you know, it's like that, just the patriotism that was during that time. All the political issues that were also going on during that era, right? It felt just a little bit more upbeat than a David Fincher movie that I would be expecting, right?
Yeah, that's it. You know, one of the most daunting tasks if I was a director, what would keep me up at night before we actually launched a project is, especially if it's a project of the past, like a history piece, I would be so stressed. I'm like, how do you recreate? I was reading on IMDb trivia that David Fincher actually had trees flown into that lake where the murder site was because he wanted it to be accurate. He flew trees in because there weren't trees in it there anymore. Like, it had changed so much since 1968. He had to recreate the scenery of the 1960s. How do you do that? Same thing with like movies like what's the Hollywood one by Tarantino? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. How did he do that? Did you guys seen that? Like, how did he recreate Hollywood from the 60s? Like the streets, the building. How do directors do that? Like, it's pretty incredible. So that is very impressive. Like the amount of care that David Fincher put. I like what you said, Al, where he put himself in the box. It's almost like a challenge to himself. It's almost like, how good of a director am I? If I handcuff myself through historical accuracy, can I still make an entertaining movie that people want to see? And I think that he succeeded in that. I was very entertained, just a little disappointed at the end. Chase, give us your highlight reel of like what really got you in this movie, whether it's a feeling or a scene or actors that did a really good job. Like, what if you were to sell this movie to somebody who hadn't seen it? How would you do that? And don't worry about spoilers.
Okay, yeah. So want to just say something to what you were just talking about, and I think this is right, kind of from, I think it was Callum who mentioned that like Panic Room is kind of his fun project, right? Going from Fight Club to Panic Room, and then yeah, this one would be like, okay, now I've had some fun. Let's do something hard. But yeah, so if I was to sell it, and I think one of the things that kind of drove me to want to see this in the first place was the puzzle aspect of it. So my friend Matt from high school, he was kind of looking at doing cryptology for the Air Force, and that didn't pan out for him, but which is okay. But like him and I, man, like during high school, we did puzzles, we did mazes, we did all sorts of this kind of, we created a language so we could pass notes to each other. And so many times our teachers would snag those notes, they'd look at it and go, and just throw it away, because we had created a language that if you knew the cipher, it was very easy. But anyways, and so for me, that was kind of one of the drivers. I was like, okay, this is about like puzzles and ciphers and all of that. So I was interested in that. But yeah, watching the movie, yeah, I think the connection was really with Jake Gyllenhaal's character and him trying to figure this out, and you're trying to figure it out with him. It's like good spy books or right, like mystery novels where you're given clues throughout, and you're trying to solve the puzzles with the character, and I really liked that. I think Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code did a really good job at that. I remember reading that, and that was torture, because I'm like, I think I figured out like the solution, and I had to read 10 pages to get to if I was right or not. And this was kind of the same thing, where I'm watching it going, okay, can I figure out what's going on along with Jake Gyllenhaal's character? And at the end, I think everybody has the assumption that guy who worked at the like hardware store or whatever was probably the guy, but then we don't know, and the police are like, oh, there's not enough evidence to support it, and so you just you're left. So yeah, for me, I think the fun of it for me was getting to play detective while watching a movie, and trying to figure out stuff along with your main protagonist.
I think everybody who grows up wanting to be a detective fantasizes about something like this. Just intellectually challenging, bad guy who's literally bad. And so you have every justification to use every tool in the arsenal to catch this guy, but you've also got to be smart because he's one step ahead of you. I just don't think this happens very often. I think that's why this made such a great movie and why it's such a great story. Justin, were you convinced that Arthur in the hardware store was the Zodiac killer?
I would say I am most likely convinced, but this is the part where the movie was good enough to be vague in a lot of this, because I was like, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but they kept harping on writing analysis, but then he was ambidextrous and they couldn't get the correct samples. And so I don't know how much actual circumstantial, was it 10 things? Was it 12 things? Was it 100 things? Was it 2 things that made Lee, I'll just call him Lee, was he actually the guy, And so based on the movie, I definitely would say, yeah, he probably was, because after he died, the author never got the breathing phone call anymore. And he went to prison for something else. And for like 7 years, there was no Zodiac things. And then as soon as he got out, he sent that letter. Lee sent that letter to the detective.
Alan, the movie takes us on a journey. The movie, like Chase was saying, I love that you're on the journey with these characters, but it's frustrating, but in an enjoyable way, because they like string you along, and there's like patterns of the serial killers, and then all of a sudden you realize that the pattern broke, and then all of a sudden you realize that the handwriting's different, and then somebody floats out the idea, because you're like, as an audience member, you're so focused in, this is a movie about Zodiac, we're trying to catch the Zodiac killer, and then they float the idea, they're like, oh, well, now there's just copycats, like he's deviated from a pattern, this probably isn't even the Zodiac anymore. And so then you're like, so are we looking for multiple murderers then, or are we still focused on the Zodiac? And they start to spread themselves thin, and it gets really confusing. And then they have what's his name? Arthur Lee, whatever his name is. Yeah, Arthur. They do that interrogation scene of Arthur, and it's looking like a slam dunk, because he's got the boots, he's got the Zodiac watch. He keeps offering them information that they aren't even asking him about. Like, he's like, by the way, those knives that were bloody in my car, those were from chickens. And you saw the detectives look at each other like, we didn't ask him about the knives. Like, he's just offering this information, like slam dunk after slam dunk. And you're like, oh, great. Like, the movie's wrapping up. This is the guy. Now it's going to be a cat and mouse chase game. And then the movie takes another turn, and they're like, yeah, the evidence is inconclusive. Can't give you a warrant. You got to drop this guy. And you're like, what? And then everybody gives up on it except Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's still pursuing it. And then there's that scene where he sees the lady in jail, and she's like, it was a short name. And he's like, what do you say? Like Jake or whatever it was. I forget the name now. I'm thinking Jake Gyllenhaal, but she's like, it was short for something. And he's like, Jake, it's Jake, right? And she's like, no, not Jake. He's like, no, but it was. Like, he's trying to force it now. He's trying to force the evidence that he believes, because he wants so badly to have like, what's it called? Closure on this case. This was a what? And then so you leave Arthur in the dust, and they're like, oh, his fingerprints don't even match. You got the wrong guy. And so then you forget about him. 40 minutes later in the movie, Jake Gyllenhaal's like, wait, that guy actually is the Zodiac. And then they have that cool moment in the hardware store where like they make eye contact, and he sees Jake Gyllenhaal, and he's like, oh, and he's like, hi, my name's, what is his name again in the movie? His name was Robert. He's like, hi, my name's Robert. Arthur? He's like, I'm Robert. And you see Arthur's face visibly change, like it kind of sinks. He's like, oh, this is the guy that I've been calling in the middle of the night and breathing through my phone. Like he recognizes him. They have that moment. And so you're like, is that David Fincher saying that, like, did we find the guy? And then the movie wraps up. So with that roller coaster of freaking clues and kills and confusion, where did you land? Were you satisfied with the journey? Were you unsatisfied with the conclusion? Did you think there was enough evidence stacked up to pin it on Arthur? Did you think David Fincher was manipulating the audience by having that moment with Jake Gyllenhaal and Arthur where they like see each other and they have that facial expression, and then he leaves? What were your thoughts just on the, like, again, with the whole journey? What was kind of your emotion there?
Along for the ride for sure. What I'd love to ask David Fincher is like, what were you trying? Why? What were you trying to deliver? And what were you trying to like make the audiences feel? Because just like you said, it was kind of all over the place. And that's how the story actually was. It was just kind of all over the place. What I love about this is that, and I even did it yesterday when I finished watching it yesterday, is I got back on my computer and then I start Wikipediaing like, the Zodiac. I'm like, okay, what did they get wrong? Like, where did because obviously Wikipedia is gonna give me all my answers, right? So, but I did it last time when I watched it with Becky. Like, you get on your phone and you just start looking up the, like, all right, what really happened here, kind of thing, and you start taking yourself down this journey. Like you were saying before, like everybody has that kind of spark in them. Everybody wants to be that intellectual genius and have that aha moment. And he doesn't deliver it in this movie. So then what do? You go searching for it afterwards, right? I need that resolution, just like Robert, just like he was like searching for it his whole life, right? And I mean, one of two conclusions: you're gonna go insane and give up, or you're gonna find it, right? Like there's got to be one of those, and it's not, right? So it's yeah, I did the same thing yesterday because I remembered one of his ciphers was actually decoded like just a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2021. One of his uncipherable ciphers was actually decoded, and I was trying to find it. I gave up because I was tired, but I was trying to find out what it was that it actually said, and I found it when I watched it a few years ago. And it was more of the same. Like you remember how when the school teacher and his wife deciphered the first one, and it was basically nonsense, right? Like him talking about his collecting souls for the afterlife or whatever. It was some university students that got together and actually like figured it out. They figured out what the cipher was, and so they broke the one of I think there are four. Oh boy, I'm gonna get my facts wrong. However many he's actually submitted, only one was ever decoded, and then these college students, university students, figured out the last one, and it was more of the same. It didn't really say anything great. It was just kind of nonsensical, Satan worshiping, like they're going to be my slaves in the afterlife type stuff. But I was trying to find it because I wanted to read it again. But that's what the movie does to me. It makes me want to go back and actually look through the elements that surround the case, because it's just so crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I remember like 5 years ago when I watched the movie, I was actually kind of mad at the movie because it's pulling you all these different directions and then looping in old clues that we had already dismissed. Like I was like, this is too. But this time watching it, because I was expecting that, because I knew that the movie would do that, I found it a lot more enjoyable. I'm like, it's kind of, it is a ride. It's a ride. The movie takes you for a ride. And I had a lot more fun this time watching it. And just like you were saying about like wanting to dig in and find out the data points, I've always had this fantasy of being so obsessed about one singular thing, like a case, where I would just have a room with like the red string and like data points, you know what I mean? Like I've always wanted to be that passionate about something. Like similar to what Jake Gyllenhaal's character, he had a scrapbook of Zodiac stuff. Like he was obsessed with it. And I'm like, that level of just obsession and dedication, I kind of yearn for it. That book that you got, Becky, a couple Christmases ago, Chaos, about the Manson murders. That book made me think that too. I was like, he has so much data. Everything ever said about this case is like in that book, and it's an amazing work. Same thing with that you remember that podcast Serial, when podcasts first started getting good. There's that podcast, and she's like literally like this journalist gets so involved in this case that she's like walking the same distance that he would to see if it's actually possible. Like she's just getting into all the granular details. I've always wanted that. And this movie kind of, I don't know, it takes you along for that ride. You almost feel that way because you're with these characters. Speaking of characters, Chase, give us an evaluation on how you feel the actors did, just in terms of their performance in this movie. Mostly, we're talking Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Downey Jr., and Mark Ruffalo. Give us your breakdown on their performances.
Yeah, so I did like how those characters evolved through the film and the like decade span ish that the movie covered, and you see kind of Robert Downey Jr.'s character kind of go off the rails and end up in bad spots, and you just try and like understand clearly this was part of it. And then Jake Gyllenhaal's obsession. I think you just made a lot of really good points about how, right. I think it was because he was like that kind of Boy Scout, I like to do puzzles type of guy. And, he, like probably all of us, just wanted closure, wanted the end of the story. Whereas Mark Ruffalo's character, right, the inspector, I think he might have been a little more calloused, because, right, and detective work in the 60s and 70s, right? How many cases went unresolved? I think there's probably a lot where you don't have a lot of evidence, or right, you think about the technology that we have today that they didn't have. So you could dust for fingerprints, but then running fingerprints through like a national database to figure out, like, that probably didn't exist. Right. DNA analysis, that didn't exist. And so there's a lot that being a detective at that time, and you kind of get it in his conversations with Jake Gyllenhaal's character, where it's kind of like, you got to just drop it. Like we've done everything that we can do. There's not much more else we can do to kind of like uncover this. So it was fun seeing the evolution of the characters, and just as time passed, how they evolved as people, and how the Zodiac killings kept influencing their lives for better or for worse. I guess nobody really for better, but everybody for worse. And just how, it kind of was this mind worm for them, just eating away at their sanity.
Yeah. Love that, Chase. Alan, what were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So since we're talking about characters, my favorite character in this whole movie, freaking Casey Jones. Anybody else see that? Anybody else knows that was Casey Jones?
Are you kidding me? I totally missed it. No.
Bald Casey Jones.
Yeah, it was the missing hair that threw me off. Oh my gosh, you're right. Holy smokes.
Yeah, that one. I forgot about it, and I'm pretty sure I said it to Becky, but she didn't care as much. So I'm telling it to you guys, because you guys gave me the reaction I was hoping for when I pointed it out to Becky. But I was like, it's Casey Jones.
I'm so mad because now I want to go back and rewatch it. I'm so mad that I didn't recognize that watching the movie any of the times that I've seen it. Criminy. That's really cool. Thanks for pointing that out, Al. One thing I'll say, just the performances. Jake Gyllenhaal, such an interesting actor, because in this era, I mean, just off the top of my head, he had like October Sky, Brokeback Mountain, never saw it, don't want to see it. But he had like Zodiac. I would even put like Nightcrawler in kind of this frame, where he's kind of like this wide-eyed, like I don't know, innocent, everybody kind of talks down to him, looks down to him kind of thing. And that like was cemented in my mind, and so it really threw me off when he starts getting into roles like Southpaw and like Mysterio in the Spider-Man movie, and what's the he's doing a new one, Roadhouse. I think it's called Roadhouse, where he's going to be like an MMA fighter, and he's just jacked and he's stacked and he's mean and he's like charismatic, and like now he's talking down to people and now he's pushing people around. It's kind of an interesting, like if you follow Jake Gyllenhaal's career, it's almost an interesting, like he flipped it upside down. He's like, I'm sick of being like these passive, submissive like characters that get bullied. I'm gonna start doing some bullying. And so it's kind of cool to watch his progression in his career. Robert Downey Jr., I think, was my favorite character in this movie. I don't know how much. It's so interesting because so much of Robert Downey Jr., not just in this movie, but in all of his movies, but it's noteworthy. This was in 2007, so 1 year before his explosion as Iron Man. It's so hard for me to tell what's scripted and what's ad-libbed. He's so good. He's such a natural talker in these roles, in these characters. And what's confusing to me is because he's so funny, and I'm like, that sounded ad-lib. Like when, you know, he's on the boat and he's like, welcome aboard, and he like walks away. It's just like funny. And I'm like, was that scripted or was that ad-libbed? It sounded ad-libbed. But then when you see him in like interviews, like he was on the Rogan podcast and all this stuff, he's not like naturally that funny. He's a pretty normal guy. Like he's not like comedian level funny, but he is in his movies. There's something about being in front of a camera. Robert Downey Jr. just shines. He knows how to shine. He's funny. He's charismatic. He's interesting. His voice inflection, like you want to listen to what he has to say. His little ticks and his little idiosyncrasies and his little like pen taps and his little like adjustments of his glasses. He's such a fun actor to watch. I loved Robert Downey's performance in this movie, and that's not saying much because he's great in pretty much everything that he does. Here's something that might be a little controversial, and Chase will get to you in just a second. I don't like Mark Ruffalo. I thought he did great in this movie. I actually just don't like the actor. And this might be a hot take because I know everybody's like, I mean, obviously he's a professional. He's better than me. I'm not trying to like say I could do any better, but just there's something about like his voice is a little too monotone, and he tries. I feel like he tries too hard. He's almost like an overactor. He's almost like, I don't know. Have you guys seen what's the movie was it Spotlight, where it's the revealing the Catholic Church, and he's like a journalist. There's a scene where he's like, they knew, and what are we like? Who's gonna be next? And like he completely like blows the top, and it's so unreal. I'm like, people don't talk like that in real life, but he tries so hard. I just think he overact, like the whole pursuit of Jake Gyllenhaal trying to get like an interview with him as a cop, and he's just like completely dismissive and like annoyed and pissed off, but then eventually he softens up. I'm just like, I see you're trying to make this character interesting, but I feel like you're trying too hard. Whereas you look at Robert Downey Jr. and it feels so natural. Mark Ruffalo, I feel like feels a little unnatural, a little too unnatural for me. But that's just my own personal opinion. Chase, what were you going to say?
So wanted to just point out a couple of things. So first off, Roadhouse is a remake of a Patrick Swayze movie from the 80s called Roadhouse, where he's a bouncer at a bar. And it'll be better because we'll hopefully take the kind of campy approach that Patrick Swayze did. But apparently the reason that Jake Gyllenhaal got cast was from one of his really early movies called Donnie Darko. If you've seen that, and it's because he was able to play this like double-sided persona of like creepy kid versus like normal kid, and being able to do that switch. And so David Fincher apparently brought him on because he liked Donnie Darko so much, and he's like, this guy can be both a Boy Scout and show that kind of mentally unstable aspect that does come. And Donnie Darko is clearly an odd movie. If you haven't seen it, it's I don't even know, like it's like a time travel kind of movie. I don't know. It's weird. And it's strange. I would probably recommend it for anybody who wants to watch a weird movie. It's good, but weird. And so, yeah, you know, yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal. I mean, he was trying to break out, like, and he's done great stuff. But yeah, this I think just added to his repertoire very, very nicely. And I think this was, to me, this is one of those movies that helped transition him from being like a kid, teenager, like young adult, into like, now I'm a real grown up, you know, in my acting kind of chops, and now I'm going to start playing real grown up roles. And kind of, you saw that with Leonardo DiCaprio, and I think, right, it was like Blood Diamond and The Departed were kind of those two major roles where you're like, he's not a kid anymore. He's not even like a young adult. Like, he's a grown up, like a full-fledged, you know, buttons to brass grown up. And I think this was one of those movies for Jake Gyllenhaal that kind of moved him out of that I'm a teenage heartthrob to like, I'm an adult male.
Yeah, I agree. Jake Gyllenhaal, he's such an excellent actor. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, just a little bit. I agree with what you're saying with Mark Ruffalo. Mark Ruffalo is not. How do I say this? He makes a better nice guy. He's a nice guy. That's what he is. He's a really good nice guy. There's a movie, a rom-com that Becky and I watched when we were first married together, called Just Like Heaven, with Mark Ruffalo and I forget the girl in it. All of a sudden, Reese Witherspoon. Nice rom-com, right? Like, it was a good movie. Like, he was a good protagonist as a good love interest. I liked him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe because he was kind of the nerdy guy, didn't quite fit in with the rest of the guys, and so his little bits of overacting, you know, trying to fit in and be the tough cool guy, like, fell flat. Like, you even remember in Age of Ultron, and they're all trying to lift Thor's hammer, and then he does it, and he's like, I'm the Hulk, and nobody laughs because it's not even funny. I think that was just probably a genuine reaction from the other actors. Like, it's just like, all right, you're corny, dude. But I got the same vibes from this movie as I did when he was in. He also played the detective in Catch Me If You
Collateral. Collateral with Tom Cruise.
No, actually, I was thinking the Magic movie.
Well, now there's 3 movies he was a detective in. Like,
but he's not a great detective.
Diversify a little bit, Mark Ruffalo. Yeah, he was the detective in Collateral as well. But anyway, continue your thought.
I forgot about that too. Yeah, you're right. And so I'm basically just agreeing with you that I feel like he's better. He shines his best when he gets to be the nice guy. And actually, today even I saw a video clip, just scrolling while I was going to the bathroom. I saw a video clip of, crap, what's the actor's name that played Thanos? Somebody help me out.
Josh Brolin.
Okay, so it was Josh Brolin, and he was asked, "What was your favorite part about being in the cinematic universe?" And he shared this experience where him and Mark Ruffalo and someone else were on the scene together, and he's like, yeah, these were my boys. Like, we're all like the same age, and like, so I related better to these guys than I did, most of the rest of the cast. But I'm Thanos, and he's the Hulk, and I fell to the ground or something, and I forgot my line, and so I turned to Mark and I was like, "What's my line?" Mark's like, "Why would I know your line?" And so he just kind of had a moment. He's like, "Come on!" He's like, "What's my line?" And then Mark gave it to him, and he's like, that's just how Mark is. He's just the nicest guy, and he's always got everybody's back. And I think that kind of encapsulates, like, really well, like, he's too much of a nice guy that when he gets put in a role where he has to be like the tough guy cop, I think it's just so contrary to his genuine character that it shows in the wrong way. Anyway, that's all I have on Mark.
That's a good assessment. And you know what? You just triggered something that I think, I hate to admit this because it's really unfair. But when you mentioned that he was the Hulk, it just dawned on me. I'm like, I think I can pinpoint the exact moment I realized I didn't like Mark Ruffalo. And it was when I saw him in Avengers, because he replaced Edward Norton, who I thought was a better Hulk. And so I think subconsciously I was just a little bit pissed off at him. And it's not even his fault. Like, he got hired, good for him. But I was really mad that Marvel replaced him as the Hulk, because I just thought he didn't do as good of a job. So anyway, there's a little bit of deep-seated, I guess, repressed anger towards that actor through no fault of his own. Now, there's this trope in movies where the wife acts as the wet blanket to whatever the protagonist is trying to do. And this movie had that element in it. Justin, you have a naggy wife. What's that like?
I plead the fifth. You want me to get murdered?
Ace, you have a nagging wife. Would you care to chime in?
Don't we all?
But Justin, I want you to speak on that a little bit. Like,
see, this is one of the things that rubs me the wrong way on this, is that all of us are movie men. We're obsessed with movies. But would you go to the extreme to say, you know what? I'd rather watch movies than be with my family, my wife, and my kids? Like, if you are, you'd be single right now, you know? And we've towed the line and we said, hey, look, every other Tuesday, it's our night. Yeah, I put my foot down. I got one day. So, yeah. And then you can have 6 other days.
I'm only doing this on Tuesdays because I'm not at home.
Yeah.
You lucked out. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I feel like this trope, and whether this is true to real life or not, that's not really what I'm calling into question. I'm just from a movie's perspective, just from the quality of a movie. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it's like salt. It's like seasoning. Like in little bits, it can actually help the story. Like the problem with the Rocky movie, one of the problems with the Rocky movies is that this seemed to be just a constant. Like Adrian would just never let him fight, and you could just expect it in every single movie, pretty much, except the third. I mean, the third one, she talks him into fighting, but there's always like this wet blanket moment where the story slows down. You kind of push the brakes. He has to deal with Adrian before he can, kick his rear in gear and actually get to, the motivated training montage that we're all expecting. And so I feel like, maybe, gosh, it worked really well in Rocky 2. I feel like do it in one movie, but then stop. Like Rocky 4 didn't really need it, that scene though, where she wakes up from the coma and she says one thing, like she said, do one thing for me, win. And you hear that bell and you see Mickey and he's like, take us, what are we waiting for? And Rocky like gives Adrian a wry grin. And then all of a sudden you see the next scene, you see him doing a one-handed push-up with a sunset in the background. The music is just, and you're just like, yeah, let's get it. In those instances, I feel like wet blanket really works because it does that to the audience. In this movie, I'm like, did we really need it? Or is it just one more domino that David Fincher is trying to tip over to illustrate how desperate Jake Gyllenhaal's character was, where he was to the point where not only is he trying to force evidence on somebody he's interviewing in jail in order to fit within the narrative that he's already concluded is true, or like he's past that point and now he's like abandoning his family, and his wife took his kids to their mother's house, and you're like, you can't blame her. They're getting an anonymous phone call. He's published in the paper as a Zodiac hunter. Zodiac has never been caught. They're getting random phone calls. You can't blame her. But was that really a necessary part of the movie, or did it just slow down the movie for the sake of slowing it down? I'm kind of torn. What do you guys think?
The other thing about this is it's not even true to this actual person. So he got remarried 1975 to 1980, and so like the whole time he was married to one lady during this, and then he married another one, and so he married 2 different ladies during this obsession, and so it wasn't just one, it was 2, and so it was just really movie filler. It wasn't even true. So yeah, I guess it was David Fincher, like, I don't know. It wasn't true to life, and it just put a bad taste in my mouth.
Chase, Alan, any assessment there? Is that, well, we're all pretty much in agreement? I didn't know that, Justin. Thanks for illustrating the true historical facts there. So it's really unnecessary if it wasn't even historically accurate. But what do I know? I'm not David Fincher. I'm not a professional movie director. Maybe it is like a really, I don't know, maybe subconsciously we needed that to feel that extra sense of urgency that Jake Gyllenhaal was, that extra sense of desperation where his life is literally falling apart because he's so obsessed with solving this mystery. I don't know. Maybe it was necessary, and maybe I'm being a wet blanket about the wet blankets. I don't know.
And maybe it's right. And this might be a theme that we'll see throughout David Fincher's movies, is how your main protagonist, how their world and the things that they care about basically like fall apart for them, right? So like Alien 3, right? Everybody that Ripley cared about dies, right? Like the Newt and Hicks and then the doctor, right? Everybody dies. And like in Fight Club, right? Similar thing. 7, right? Brad Pitt's character, it all just falls apart. And maybe that's just something that he does in his movies. And again, there's several more that we have to go through, but maybe it's just to highlight that fact that as people get obsessive over whatever it is, just everything falls apart. And that's just me taking a stab in the air right now. But yeah, maybe it wasn't historically accurate, but he just wants to highlight the case that as people become obsessive over whatever it is, whether it's fighting in underground basements or trying to find a serial killer in 7, like just your life's gonna fall apart.
I really do love, like, David Fincher is really good at let's call them breadcrumb trail movies, because you got 7 with the 7 deadly sins and you're following the breadcrumb trail. You've got Fight Club, where towards the end of the movie he's trying to figure out who is Tyler Durden, and he's following the breadcrumbs to the point where he realizes that it's, spoilers, anybody hasn't seen Fight Club, that it's him. And then in this movie you've got, everything that we saw, like the cipher, the codes, the letters, all of the clues. I don't know, I feel like David Fincher's really good at this. And like Chase was saying, was it Chase? Whoever was saying that he intentionally put himself in this box in order to challenge himself. I actually think there's some credence to that. Yeah, that was you, Chase. I think there's some credence to that because pointing up, you're on a different part of the screen than me. I don't know. Who said it?
It was Alan.
Alan. It was Alan. Alan's above me. And my
Alan's that way.
Alan's over here.
Point to Alan.
Alan's beneath you, Chase. What are you talking about? No, what Alan was saying about like David Fincher challenging himself, because with those other movies, Fight Club 7, he had creative liberties and he could just he could end it how he wanted. He could place clues however he wanted. You know what I mean? This one, he had to stay within the confines. And I think that's, I don't know. I appreciate that, Al. I didn't actually consider that he was literally challenging himself. That was really cool. All right. Final thing we're going to talk about just real quick, ranked 1 out of 10, 10 being a perfect movie. And typically 10 is like sacred to me. Usually on a scale of 1 to 10, I always think of 10 as sacred, but I don't want 10 to be impossible. This is how I'm describing the scale to you guys. All right. So I don't want us to think like it's a no-no to say a movie is a 10, because they've got to be there. Otherwise, why do we even have the scale of 1 to 10? If the best you could ever get is a 9, well, then that's not a scale of 1 to 10, right? So 10 does exist, but it's sacred. All right. So keep that in mind. What would you guys give this movie on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm just curious.
Real quick, just to create a baseline, where does Alien 3 fit on the scale of 1 to 10? Because that's basically the comparison.
The 1 to 10 scale is not graded on a curve. You gotta decide that for yourself. I'm not gonna give you some baseline metric. No, this is something that you have to dig deep. You have to look internally, introspectively, Chase. If 10 is perfection, what do you rank this movie as?
So for me, I think it's some of the biases that I came in with and some of the problems that I vocalized before. But I'd give it like a solid 8.5. good movie. I had problems that there was no resolution. That's nobody's fault, but it does affect my movie viewing experience. And then again, right, kind of as you guys talked about, some of Mark Ruffalo's personal character versus his cast character dichotomies, and how that rubs against, kind of pulls away from the greatness that could have been in the movie. But yeah, I'd say a solid like 8.5. Good movie. Probably isn't going to be on my rewatchable list anytime soon. I think next time I watch it, it'll be when one of my kids wants to watch it, and we'll sit down for 3 hours to do that. But yeah, that's where I'd rank it.
That's fair. That's a fair ranking. Appreciate that, Chase. Justin, what do you put it as?
I was gonna go 7, but then I was like, I can't be 7 because that movie is awesome. So I'm gonna give it a 7.5 because of this scene. Are you giving me a name? What, retarded? No, I'm not. And because of that scene, that was ad lib probably.
That's great.
It is, I think, rewatchable after like 5-7 years. So I'm going to get a 7.5.
Love that. You know what else I just thought was a really funny scene? It made me and Natalie both laugh out loud. Was after like maybe a minute of conversation between Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. He like just cuts off what he says, and he's like, "I can't ignore this anymore. What is this?" And he points to the blue drink. He's like, "It's actually really delicious." The scene changes, and they're sitting at the table, and they've got like 8 cups of the blue drinks. That was so funny. I like how the movie kind of broke up the monotony. And again, I credit Robert Downey Jr. He did such a good job. Alan, what do you rank this movie as?
Boy, I feel like a jerk because immediately I thought, all right, if 10 is a perfect movie, and it is sacred, and there are a few movies that meet that category, I am grading on a curve. So then I'm looking at like 9s are like really good movies, like top tier, and then 8's kind of like my good rewatchable, my go-to feel goods. 7 is I'm gonna watch it if it comes on, or if somebody's like playing it in the background, I'll probably still watch it. So I kind of put this like at a 6, for all the same reasons that Chase said, but I think my metric's just lower. So I don't think it's his greatest movie. And it's, yeah, I mean, just like Justin said, it's a rewatch once every, it's been about 5 years for me. So that's where it kind of falls, rack a stack against David Fincher's other movies. It's not a bad movie by any means. Still trends positive. Just there you go. That's what I give it.
That's fair. And speaking on that, I usually gauge if I'll like a movie or not, like, because I don't want any spoilers. But I guess I give myself like an expectation spoiler. If I'm not sure about a movie that's released in theaters, I'll check IMDb, and usually I found anything 6 and above, I find I find 6 enjoyable, even if it's not like a great movie. I usually have a good time with a 6. Anything below a 6, I usually find absolutely reprehensible. But so Alan, I'm very similar to you. I really like how you broke down the 10 through 6, because I'm pretty much the same way. And I would say that Zodiac, so knowing that I enjoy movies that are 6s, I would give it a 6.5. And I think the reason is, you guys articulate a few of the reasons: the inconclusive ending, which is understandable because it's based on a true story. But I would even say, I don't know. I feel like the first time I watched the movie, the pacing was a little slow. For some reason, it wasn't as bad when I watched it yesterday. Maybe because I was anticipating the backtracking with the clues and the jumping, 2 years, 2.5 years. And so, but I feel like the first time I watched it, I was like, that 3 hours felt like 4 hours. Like, it was so long and just daunting. But going in with the expectation that it was going to do that, it actually made the pacing a little bit better. So I can't really knock it for that. It's better on a rewatch, I think. But I do think that it could have been cleaned up. I feel like David Fincher, based on what Alan said about the research that he did in preparation for, what did you say, 18 months of researching the Zodiac in preparation for this movie. I feel like this might have been another like passion project where they're in the editing room and they're like, we still have 45 minutes of this movie we need to cut in order for it to be palpable for like the general theater audiences. And I feel like David Fincher just stewed on that for days, was stroking his chin. He's going in the cutting room floor. He's like, we can't cut that out. That's so important. What do we cut out the murders? Well, people want to see, like, it can't just be clues the whole movie. Like, you got to have like some tension, some violence, some stabbing, some shooting. I feel like he really just didn't want to let any of it go. And for movie men, that might not be a problem. For general audiences, I think it's very problematic. 3-hour movie of detective work, I feel like is a little dense for most people. So there you go. 6.5 for me. All right. Anything else you guys would like to add? Nod your head or shake your head. We good? Everything was meant to be said was said. Cool. I'm glad we did this. What's the next movie? Is it The Social Network, or is it Benjamin Button? Social Network, or what is it? What is Benjamin Button next? What's next?
Isn't it? I think it was 2008. That was Benjamin Button, or no?
No.
And then Social Network, I think, was
2010 is.
Yeah. So is it Benjamin Button next?
Hold on. Pulling it up.
Uh-oh. Fact check.
Yeah.
Fact check.
Benjamin Button. Yeah, it was 2008. Justin was right.
Okay, this
Social Network,
is
2010.
the only other David Fincher movie I have seen before. It has been a while, but I have seen it. So
all right. Well, then I'm less excited to hear your feedback, Justin. But
fine then.
I will still be here for it. Peace out.